Well, welcome back to another special edition from the IFBTA. And this is one of our Meet Our Members series. And I want you to meet the person I'm going to have a conversation with today, which is Keith Szot, who's the Senior Vice President and Chief Evangelist and an industry supporter of Esper. So, Keith, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me today, Rob. Looking forward to it.
So, I actually started to get to know Esper last June when I was in Singapore for the NRF Asia show. And then lo and behold, we have another industry partner that does some work with you. But I'm not so sure that our audience actually understands who Esper is and how they got started. I know you've been there since pretty much the beginning. So maybe we could start out with two things, a little bit about your background and also of Esper's.
Okay. Yeah, I've traveled quite a long path in the industry. Actually started in 1986, of all things, doing medical system embedded programming. Got more into the business side, started at Microsoft, launched Microsoft Developer Network and grew that business in the early 90s. Got into cryptography in 95 and rolled out the infrastructure for what we see today for doing credit card transactions on the internet, which was an interesting concept back in 95. But what really got me going on this path was working on Windows CE in the early days and getting it into key vertical markets, including retail, industrial automation. And that took me to Windows Mobile. So I worked on Windows Mobile for a while, then went into strategic consulting, primarily with Microsoft, and did IoT work for a few years with AWS and working on Linux, which then brought me to Esper because one of the founders of Esper was the architect on Windows CE. Great guy, Yadhu Gopalan, along with Shiv Sundar. They drew me into this and, strangely enough, brought me into the world of Android, which I never thought I would because it's kind of like, in the day, the anti-Microsoft, but really dug into how we do dedicated device management.
Well, as I just heard the background there, and then we really should talk about the background on Esper itself. But boy, are there a lot of touch points out there, and a lot of the things that you brought up. I don't know that all of our listeners and our audience may actually know some of those things on the mobile piece. But did you touch the hospitality, retail, food service industry when you were at Microsoft on the CE products?
Yes. We were working on getting design wins with Windows CE on some of the early, what I would call human machine interface experiences that were being experimented with, especially at convenience store. You think gas stations, that was a big one.
Absolutely. The great crossover area for the food service industry and great in technology as well. So, with that background, so give us the overview of Esper.
Yeah, so we are a dedicated device infrastructure provider. We're a platform. And when you look at MDM and use cases, MDM really started out with like BYOD and making sure that you can mix work and personal on your device, controlling laptops for corporate IT. We do none of that. We're focused on dedicated, which means revenue producing or key business process running devices on behalf of customers, all the way from enterprise to SMB. And really, it's about tight control of those devices, being able to manage them at scale, and taking a more modern approach to how you manage them, which really is how you drive them with code.
But when you're talking about dedicated devices, so first of all, I'm queuing in a few things that you just said. So
Yeah,
first of all, SMB up to enterprise, got that.
yeah.
Okay. And you're talking about the word dedicated. So how does the word dedicated fall into the devices and things that you're managing and the services you provide?
Yeah. So you look at the customer owns the device. It's their device, and they completely specify and control how that device is used, and it needs to be very tightly managed. Because it is producing revenue or is associated with a business process, that means that the status of that device is extremely important, and many times it's unattended. You don't have a sophisticated person on the other end to make sure it's running. So being able to remote troubleshoot and figure out what's wrong with that device, and first of all, getting that awareness that you have a problem is very important. And then being able to remediate it to get it back online to doing what it needs to do is extremely important for the customer.
Well, I would guess, especially as you look at restaurants, I mean, a lot of restaurants, there's two thoughts here. A lot of restaurants know that if they're down, especially in the QSR segment, if you lose that front line, you are really down,
Yep.
especially in the store, because you may not have online ordering capability there. Not people are shifting to kiosks and things, but those are mission critical, but they are revenue generating. I find that the concept of revenue generating side of it, having a specific focus, that's a very interesting, unique focus, because I've never actually had somebody say that they're focused on that end of it to make sure that's maintained. But I think to your point, so is QSR one of the main areas that you're working in?
Yeah, absolutely. When you look at QSR, there are a lot of changes and challenges going on in the industry now, right? You brought up one big one, kiosk self-service. How do you roll that out? How do you build that out? And we have a great fit in that particular area because of what we do. Part of it too is the general industry migration away from Windows to Android. And that shift has been very beneficial to us in terms of helping customers figure out an efficient way to do it with the constraints of hardware refresh and all the things that you got to deal with, especially with franchisees, hardware fees, things like that. And we've been very helpful to those types of customers to navigate that and get themselves on Android so that they can deliver these modern solutions moving forward.
But it's not just on Android. It could be on the existing stack that they have.
So we support Android today. And when I say we support Android, there's a lot of different flavors of Android out there, right? You got your Google GMS
Right.
type. We also specialize in the open source because many times in the dedicated space, the customers like purpose design the overall solution where GMS has some benefits, but for what they're trying to do, it's overload for their business case and what they're trying to accomplish on the device. So we focus on Android. We're very flexible there. We have built our platform, though, to be OS agnostic. And our first step in that direction is to support iOS because we see iOS being offered through iPads primarily as a more premium experience. And so we're very customer driven. And that was the initial feedback from some of our customers is they wanted us to support
Well, but
iOS.
to be very clear, you guys are global as well. And
Yes.
so you can't count on different parts of the world have different, preferences as well. And there are different software providers and people out there as well.
Different OEMs too. I think Huawei is a great example. I mean, Huawei is banned in the
I'm,
US.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting to get one of the tri-screen phones.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Well, you're going to wait a while until you go to Singapore, I guess, right?
I will. Yep.
Yep.
Exactly the thought.
But we have exposure to those types of devices. And so when you look at the types of models that run on our infrastructure, we have a broad swath of different types, which I would argue makes our infrastructure stronger because we get exposed to different OEMs, different OS builds, and that benefits what you see in the United States as well as in other markets.
Well, it actually benefits somebody who's expanding globally to not necessarily have to mandate. They might go ahead and try to choose a singular software platform, so to speak, or application, but how it runs and what it runs on gives flexibility by region, by franchisee, by licensee. Especially because licensees might have multiple brands, like in an
Yep.
airport or something like that. So you're really able to support that and help and enable the franchisor or the QSR operator to work more seamlessly and frictionless with their franchisees.
Yes. And that goes to being a platform. When you look at the type of use cases we support, they're very broad. I mean, at the platform level, you can do whatever you want on what we provide. And we get into some very interesting use cases. We're actually in consumer electronics, interestingly enough, with some bespoke design solutions that use our entire stack, all the way from the OS. We actually do build an Android OS too and offer it that can be completely customized. But that strengthening of what we deliver through these different use cases, all the way from consumer electronics, brings it back to benefit the use cases in restaurants as well. You have a lot of choice, a lot of flexibility for what you can do and deliver through our infrastructure.
So this year is the only year I didn't go to CES because it was ended right on the date of NRF in New York. However, what I found, and I think it's very smart strategy to be involved in that, because there are so many consumer-driven technologies that end up being the operator-driven technologies that they can use because the cost can come down. And so if you're taking a look at that, that's certainly a crossover area.
Yes. And that's one of our specialties. We have a partnership with Lenovo as an example. And our customers are interested in trying to adapt consumer electronic devices to these types of use cases. Does it always work? No, it doesn't always work. But sometimes it does. And it really is getting that right mix of vertical market specific hardware and solutions with consumer electronic type devices that can be adapted to it. And we're very adept at that ourselves.
So, it's a competitive space, and there are a lot of people that work in the market that you're working in, that the target market's not necessarily, but you know, what would be an example of some of the competitors, and how do you differentiate yourself? Although I'm getting some bullet points already from this conversation, but how do you differentiate yourself amongst the competitive market and then in the solutions you provide to the customer?
Well, my policy is not to name names. I don't like to give airtime to our competitors. And I think people are pretty familiar with who they are. The way that I would characterize it is the MDM space came up during the period of these new like devices being introduced. Windows Mobile being one of them, and controlling laptops, servers. And so it very much had a traditional IT focus in how these things were built. And with that, it wasn't again focused on revenue producing
Right.
operational like devices, and we call them smart devices. By definition, typically the devices that we manage have a human element involved. And as soon as you get a human element involved, it can create a lot of permutations and complications for keeping these things running. These systems were built with primarily consoles in mind for these IT operational
Right.
functions, and they've become very messy, very hard to use, and things that are super important for our customers, like staging time, right, resiliency, are not as important for where our competitors come from because you typically have an IT person or a knowledgeable human that's an employee at the other end that can deal with it, right?
Right, but I do want to point out that earlier in this conversation, you did say that many of these critical revenue generating operations and devices may be unattended.
That's right. And so, with that, you need telemetry off those devices and tooling to be able to address issues remotely in the field. And so, that's an aspect of what we specialize in that I would say is unique compared to what you typically see in the industry, where you could have a knowledge worker at the other end. And then coming up a little later, well, it's taking the approach of software driving the system as much as you can. So from the ground up, we wrapped our cloud infrastructure with a RESTful API. And so completely, you have the ability to completely control our system via code if you wish. And so that's like the most modern solution. And we have some customers doing this. Like literally, the whole thing is driven cloud to cloud using code all the way from provisioning to managing them in the field. And so I think that's one unique aspect that we built it with that in mind from the start. And that leads to our DevOps for devices techniques that we promote. And so taking the principles of DevOps and applying them to these dedicated device fleets where you can have a methodology for rolling out any change to your fleet in a staged manner. You have the concept of what you don't care about how everything is in general. You care about your problem children, and we call that drift. And so we let you zero in on the devices that are in drift, which means they're out of specification, so that either via automated means or manually, because we have a very nice, easy to use console as well, you can address those. Because again, these things need to be producing revenue, they need to be driving your business. And that's what we're completely focused on in terms of what we built and what we support.
There are some additional bullet points that come to mind for me. Uh, having met you, having met the company in Asia, first of all, the global piece, certainly the aspect of how you're approaching the market with revenue generating devices, which may be unattended. But, it occurs to me another thing that may make you unique is the vertical industries, the peripheral industries that you work in that are aligned with food and beverage or have food and beverage in them. For instance, retail, and you have unattended micro markets,
Yep.
and you have, even in hotels, you have that. Could you
Yes.
just speak a little bit about the learnings or the things that maybe how you see the crossover between some of those, industries that are within the family of, customer service, customer facing?
Yeah, I think some of it goes to the enabling hardware that is associated with these use cases. You look at retail and it's a little bit different game where the AIDC devices have a much more important place in them, right? And you see the trend of, well, how do you take these devices from what I call the back of house storeroom to the front of house? And how do you take an antiquated infrastructure that was built like literally decades ago to configure and manage these devices and modernize them? I think that's a great example. Like if you're familiar with barcode scanning, you have to configure the barcode scanner. You use a config file to do it. It's kind of a ridiculous way. So
Right.
an example there is we modernized it by using the infrastructure built into Android called Manage Config, and through that, taking it to a form where you can do it completely via code, very dynamically, with an enterprise app designed to ingest this in the modern manner. So I would say that if you present us with problems and challenges that are specific to your domain, we're really good at taking the technology pieces in terms of understanding the operating system, as well as what our infrastructure can do, as well as what you can do to bring it together to find novel solutions for greater efficiency on behalf of the customer.
But I'm going to guess though that because you work in multiple industries, because you work globally, you're actually really almost like a thought leader or partner in this whole thing, with your customers because you're able to provide them information and your experience that they may not see on their own.
Absolutely. And I think a great example is our investment in Edge AI. We think that Edge AI is going to happen. Right now, we're kind of in the experimentation phase, trying to figure out what the use cases are, doing the POCs. It totally makes sense that if you're going to do that, you're going to use a foundational model that you're going to drive from the cloud. But we understand that things like the cost, the latency, and the robustness are going to point to you're going to need to do it on prem in some way, shape, or form. We already have built out the infrastructure to support these types of use cases. We haven't pushed it in the market yet because we're going at the pace of the customer, but we're doing POCs around this where you can drop an edge device within your location and basically make it available to all the devices that are not AI capable to start to experiment and play with these use cases.
But the interesting thing about that is while you said that you're going at the pace of the customer, if you think about it, you're planning ahead and
Yes.
you're ready when the customer is ready. And then when they say, hey, you know what, we're ready, or what about this, or Edge AI, how do we implement this? How should we be using it? You're actually there now as their partner to help them to figure that out the how as well.
Yes. And that goes to where we live in the ecosystem. So we work a lot with the silicon vendors, right?
Right.
We have partnerships with Intel, Qualcomm, MediaTek. We work with NVIDIA. And so if you look at it, they're the ones that are the farthest ahead because they're designing silicon that they have to figure out what it's going to be in 2 or 3 years because that's the design cycle for the OEM hardware to get it out. And
Right.
so for us, that's a great place to go to help get that vision of where the industry is going and then build the software components around
But
it.
in a partnership like that, in a partnership like that, are they just focused on the general technologies or do they come to you and say, listen, you guys really understand the retail industry, the hospitality, the restaurant industry, is there anything we should be thinking about in those use cases, when there are you actually part of the team that helps to advise them as well as they go forward in how to approach our industries?
I would say somewhat. Yeah, it is a two-way relationship. I mean, when you get into it, silicon vendors are trying to get the socket win, right? They're trying to get their
Absolutely.
chip design into a piece of hardware. How can we help them do that? But through that, we get mutual perspective that's beneficial to both parties.
So you've mentioned a lot of different types of partners. You certainly just mentioned some of the really, big ones that are leading the industry, in the silicon side of it. But what other types of partnerships and partners do you have that really bring, the total solution within our industries?
Yeah, and so some of it goes to our relationships with the OEMs that are big in these markets, and so that would be like NCR, HP would be another example. We work with solution providers like Xenial and Q, if you're
Hmm.
familiar with them. But we
Just saw
also,
them all last week.
yeah,
This week, saw them all earlier this week.
but we also work with a lot of emerging players in the industry, like Fresh, Perfect, as a couple of examples that are doing innovative products. And so, really, it's a big spread that we have technology relationships with them and go to market execution that's mutually beneficial because, again, we're infrastructure.
Right.
We like to be an ingredient in these solutions, and whether it's from a traditional OEM or a solution provider or an up and comer, all comers, and how can we be the infrastructure that
Well, let
runs
me
it?
let me point out that every one of the companies you mentioned are members of the IFBTA, which is great, and so it is an ecosystem in itself that's there. But I also imagine that you would be very beneficial to somebody who's outside the market coming into the North American market, or somebody in North American market going outside. That is part of their expansion plans. A partnership with Esper really means a lot.
I just had a conversation with an OEM out of the UK this morning. Funny enough.
I will be in the UK on Sunday,
There you go.
so you can send them my way if they're in this industry.
Yeah. And then the other side of it is just kind of that resonance with partners too. And that's where I got to give a shout out to Microtouch. They're a great crew. We've had great technological collaboration on how they can bind in our unique software advantage, which, by the way, is called seamless provisioning, into their OS build, and then really build a great go to market and relationship. And this kind of goes down to with these types of companies and partners, it's not just like a, kind of a very soft relationship because once you deliver to the customer, you collectively have to figure out the problems that will come up. And how do you work together on those problems? And, I think Microtouch represents a great example of that, right? We do that with HP, NCR, Lenovo, because in the end, the customer has to have it work.
Absolutely. And when we're talking about microtouch, or we're talking about some of the others, we're specifically talking about kiosks, we're talking about terminals, displays, but at the same time, there's this emerging market. I already mentioned, of course, the micro markets and unattended autonomous stores. However, one of the emerging ones we talk about a lot at the IFBTA is the vending machines, which are putting on the screens the touch, that are also unattended, revenue generating restaurant in a box, is how we might look at that.
Yep. And I would genericize that to human machine interface, right? This takes me back to my industrial automation days where it was man machine interface. Now it's HMI. And it's not just these vending systems, it's going to be robotics as well, right?
Absolutely, working side by side. I like the idea. What did you say? It's not the man and machine, but it's the human. What's the terminology we're using here?
HMI, human machine interface.
Right. There was a HumanX conference going on earlier this week as well when I was in Vegas, where they were talking about the interfaces and things. But we are going to see more and more robotics. I think that really plays to the point of where Esper is going to head down the road and be in more than just the aspects that somebody initially came to know you as we get in unattended operations, as we get in robotics or smart kitchens or connected, and where we have, the human and the machine working side by side in it.
Yep.
And it just sort of shows how you're going to really be embedded in making that strategy and that solution, a reality for people.
Yes, and that goes into our OS investments as an extension. You can probably expect we're supporting Linux and a focus on that. And so again, for us, and this goes to like the story with the customers, right? We're big with QSRs. Taco Bell is a customer. We work with Yum Brands, and we're starting to expand internationally there. And that's like a known relationship that we have.
Right.
We have others that we cannot talk about, but that is one that we can talk about. And it's interesting how it works for us, where we win a use case with a customer in a location, whether it's retail or restaurant. And with Taco Bell, it was the POS system for converting their legacy fleet from Windows to Android that provided huge benefit for them. And then we start to expand into other use cases. Oh, kiosk, oh, digital signage, oh, kitchen display, line busting tablet, right? Because from the customer perspective, they want one pane of glass to manage it all for this
Right.
particular use case, right? It's a different IT department. It's not like your traditional worker IT. They are operational and they have to make these restaurants run. And so they really like having us be that one pane of glass. And so you can see us extend into other use cases with other operating systems that exist within these locations. And from that, a natural extension is going to be probably robotics.
Well, it's interesting. You're now putting in my head a number of different ways of looking at how you are successful in the industry. A pane of glass is rather interesting because I generally hear one throat to choke. So I would say that you're actually creating, more of the environment and the solution that's a more positive one that moves, of how you're going to move forward, which also goes again. I'm stuck on the growth and the revenue generating types of applications. One of the things I noticed as I was taking a look at your website, and back, you do a lot of work with a lot of the online ordering companies and delivery companies as well.
We do. Yes.
Can you
Yeah.
just sort of talk to that? Because that's a pretty big piece of the ecosystem as well.
Yeah. DoorDash, Slice, right? Slice is an interesting company in terms of what they do.
On the pizza stuff.
Yeah.
And
And that's a hard one because you're at, some level hitting these mom and pop restaurants. They have no IT. They just need this damn thing to work. And how do you do that when you're scaling to tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of devices? Now, it's interesting because the suppliers of these solutions are very technically sophisticated. I talk about DevOps for devices. They really epitomize that because at scale, how are you going to manage these things with people? You need code to be able to do it. And you have to have very efficient systems to address these issues. Sometimes they're swapping out devices, right? You get down to that level, and then you need the right flexibility through the system to match the setup of the device to the deployment environment. Like the classic one is you do not want a bright screen at a romantic restaurant. The flip side of that is if you have a busy type of restaurant, well, you're going to want that screen to be super bright. And how do you build in that flexibility to the system to manage it at scale? Those are the types of problems and challenges that we think about.
And it's interesting because a lot of the people that we speak to and a lot of our members, you're going to, you have come into the IFBTA as a rather unique member because of your perspective. And I will tell you that our members will enjoy that conversation when we get together because it is a unique perspective. Is there something that you see as the future trends in this industry that maybe you want our members to know about that they may not be thinking about? Because your perspective and where you're coming from is really totally different. And a lot of the people that are in IT in our industry, may have worked their way up from operations. They're not, developers. So is there something that an observation you have or something you think we should be thinking about going forward?
Well, I think we talked about a few of them, right? Obviously, AI is going to be a big one. The evolution of these devices, robotics coming in. I think like one that people aren't maybe thinking about is 5G. You could see,
5G.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. It's actually not that hard to set up private 5G networks. And we've run into some of our customers that deal with kind of sketchy wireless infrastructure environments.
Right.
Right. And so 5G is really powerful when you look at manufacturing, industrial automation, and warehousing, right? Because these environments, they got a lot of metal. They need like very preciseness, like real time. Why couldn't that be a restaurant? Because a lot of the characteristics are very similar. We're not there yet, but I can see in the future, you're not going to do Wi Fi. You could do private 5G as an
I could
example.
see that also in a lot of the infrastructure in the buildings that we have, especially like the cruise ships and
Yep.
people that are sort of different environments. That is a solution. I would not have thought to even bring that up in this conversation, but I think that's interesting as a global standard and is something that they can leverage.
And it goes back to, well, why us? Well, we already have a customer that builds public safety devices for first responders that's on the 5G network that's distributed through AT&T FirstNet, through T-Mobile, through Verizon. We already know how to do it. So we're ready for you when the time comes.
I think that that's a very big differentiating factor that you do know how to do it and you are ready when the time comes. But you're seeing this technology because of your depth and your scope across multi-industry, multi types of technologies. You're really the glue that helps somebody to enable their future.
Yeah, and so here's the advice if you're doing a hardware refresh. You may not know what to do with AI, but you should buy fresh hardware that has an NPU in it as you evaluate that. right? If you're going to do a major hardware refresh, and an NPU, what is it? Neural processing unit. It's basically the chip that lets you efficiently do AI in the device, right?
Now, that's going to be one of your challenges, though, because of how people, especially in franchisee, franchisor environments, how often are they going to refresh? I mean, I know that years ago when I got involved, it used to be 7 to 10 years or something. They understand they got up to update the fryer, maybe in the grill, but those should last forever, right? Um, but today, that refresh, I think people are getting in their head it's every 3 years or so, but we still haven't really gotten to the point with most of the companies in our industry of doing evergreening of systems where they're just automatically refreshing as just part of a tech package or a tech fee that might be offered. We're
Yes,
getting there, but it's sort of slow.
right.
We haven't gotten to hardware as a service really yet.
Yeah, yeah, hardware as a service, device as a service. Companies have tried, but it hasn't really caught on. Now, we got you covered there, though, because it goes back to, well, if you want to do this, you drop in a box, a Linux box that has it built in, and you can distribute it to all your non-AI capable terminals, endpoints in your location. And we've built out that infrastructure already.
And there you go. See, that's exactly the point, that you knew that there had to be a solution there, just like, connected devices in kitchens. Not all connected devices in kitchen are digital and have a screen, but they may have a serial port that was used by the technicians just to diagnose the machine, and people are coming up ways to use that. So you do have a solution to bridge the gap as people have a strategy to move forward.
Yes, and this goes back to, the consumer market is driving the adoption of AI and the end-to-end designs with software and hardware. Like, I just went to Mobile World Congress. Oh my God, the demos on phones, right? They're like everywhere. It will take time for our OEMs to spin the designs and package it in a way that is appropriate and delivered for the customers that we care about, right? It will come, but it will trail.
So you see, it just made me jealous
Why?
because while I may go to CES, I follow things like Mobile World Congress because I want to see what's coming out on the phones. Not only because I want to have that triple screen phone, but because I believe that more and more mobile devices will be used in our industry. And why are we reinventing the wheel? They're just going to be, on a version of a phone. And so I would find that fascinating to go there. Then I got to figure out how to be an influencer. So they just give me the triple screen phones so that we can talk about it. But is there anything coming, by the way, since you just came back from that we should be aware of how those mobile devices, in fact, might make a bigger stake or move us forward in our industry?
I mean, we've heard about it, agent-based AI. You can see the beginnings of it, and it's taking it to a different level. I saw a very interesting device from a company that is using blockchain technology to create your AI, right? And so it is in a bubble, it is your AI, and you decide how you interact with it and how you use it, which is different than giving it to a company that stores it in the cloud, right? And they know all about you. So that was one, and it's a bespoke device designed for it.
That is people's concern, that they're sharing all this information and it's just out there. And even if they pay for it and they buy a subscription, it's really not totally theirs. But your AI and the word personalization, which seems to be a key word this year, probably go together.
Yes. And that goes to our enterprise customers, right? Because in a way, they are like an individual and they want to protect their IP. And how does this cross over to their world, right? But the agent is going to be a key part of it because then you have to think beyond generative AI, which has a lot of use, especially when you think about personalization, loyalty programs, self-service kiosks, these types of scenarios that are being experimented with now, to what if you had an agent and what does it mean? And you could build agents.
Well, I think that a lot of companies are looking at that. They're also looking to take back their data, just as individuals are. And
Yep.
so, once again, in this conversation alone, you're at the forefront of some of the things that people are talking about. But what I get is a certain level of comfort in knowing somebody else is looking. I don't have to be the expert. And quite frankly, I don't necessarily have to worry about how it's going to be used, because that's going to be Esper's role to help me to figure that out.
And we still do the meat and potatoes. We lock down your device. We let you roll out your app updates. You can set your policy. You can troubleshoot, right? So it's not like we're living in the clouds of the future. Now we're here today too. And we're operational.
And I think that that's key, that you know the business today, you can take them to where they're going. You don't forget where they are in the past, you know the challenges. You work with all of the different operators and partners that are out there in that ecosystem, and you're bringing your experience and fresh ideas, to people to feel comfort as a trusted partner.
Yep. And would love to be more of a thought leadership with the IFBTA for sure.
Well, now that would have been my last question for you: is why the IFBTA? And you might have just said it, but what brought you there in the first part? I can obviously see how you will be a great conversation partner around the table.
Yeah.
Not just one on one on this, but around the table, sharing thoughts and ideas. But what was it that brought you to the IFBTA?
I think the opportunity to engage with the tier of the industry that is really interested in driving the ball forward. Right?
Well, great.
There's a resonance there between who we are and what the IFBTA brings to the table. So,
Well, and we're always looking for thought leadership. You are clearly in, and Esper is clearly in an area that is not represented as well with our members, yet it is such a core piece, as this conversation has had. So, I'm with Keith Szot, who is the SVP and Chief Evangelist and an industry supporter member. Esper is an industry supporter member of the IFBTA. Keith, it's been a pleasure having you on, getting to introduce you to our membership. And I'm going to look forward to meeting you in person and actually continuing this conversation.
absolutely. I look forward to it as well. And Rob, thank you so much for having me on today.
Great. Thank you.